we've already taken a look at some cards in the growth affinity that end up growing over time. Now there are other cards though, not in the growth affinity, that kind of do the same thing. Today we're looking at Mana Flow Acolyte and looking at the math behind it, seeing if it's worth it. Mirillis Action is a game and screen recorder that offers the lowest megabytes per frame, the lowest computer resource usage, and the highest FPS recording. Check the link in the video description to learn more. Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a Paragon guide. I am Sylphin. Of course, we're taking a look here at Mana Flow Acolyte. So, the overview of the card is pretty simple. It's a 3 intellect knowledge card. I've been saying knowledge card. You actually buy intellect in the knowledge tree to make it all super confusing. It's pretty darn cheap. 3 attribute points only to get a card that also gives you 9 power. Now that, right off the bat, as a 3-cost card, actually is pretty phenomenal. In the stats department, that's good. So it's a really cheap, good value card in the early game. But there's also a passive effect that can scale into the late game. It's called Scholar. Increase maximum mana and power by 0.5% when purchasing intellect. So what this means is that for every point of intellect that you purchase when you have Mana Flow Acolyte on, you'll gain 0.5% more max mana and power. The next attribute point will be 1% more mana power, 1.5, 2, etc., etc., until eventually you get up to 11%, potentially 11% increased maximum mana and power just from having Mana Flow Acolyte on when you purchase power. Yes, those first 3 attribute points that you use to pay for Mana Flow Acolyte does not count. So you basically have a potential of 22 purchasing points to go into Mana Flow Acolyte, meaning 11% total buff. Now, the analysis for this card is actually quite interesting to do and a bit tough, and it's quite situational. So on one hand, we have points of intellect that you've purchased on your hero when you have Mana Flow Acolyte on, and then you have the percentage buff that you get for maximum mana. This is looking at the maximum mana. And then you have the bonus that it gives you according to certain amounts of maximum mana. So there's actually there's 3 variables here: how much intellect you purchased, the buff that it gives you, and then the buff to your maximum mana depending on your maximum mana. So it's kind of a bit to understand, but for simplicity's sake here, we can take a look at this right here with 4 points of intellect purchased with Mana Flow Acolyte on. You get 2% more maximum mana, and if you have 500 maximum mana, 2% of that is 10. So if this was the scenario here, you'd gain 10 extra mana through Mana Flow Acolyte. As you can see, we can go down for various more. I mean, 18 points of intellect purchased with Mana Flow Acolyte on gives you 9%, and say you have 1400 mana, well, you gain 126 extra mana just from having Mana Flow Acolyte on. Remember, the thing here is to remember it's a 3-cost card. It's a 3-cost. It only costs 3 attribute points, and we'll get more into that later. And as you can see, heroes start off with 400 to 500 mana or something like that, 3 to 4, 5, depending on the hero. And then in the late game, you kind of max out around the 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 range. And then of course with any added stuff from your cards or gems, you kind of max out kind of around here, and you can actually get more than this. So when we go down to the bottom of this thing here, again, remember 22 intellect points is the most you can get, because you'll reach 25 with the first 3 going to Mana Flow Acolyte, giving you 11%. And if you were just to say you were to just have, well, I've seen heroes here with 1800 mana, with that on, you would gain 198 extra mana. Hey, that's an ability. That's maybe 2 abilities if it's a low-cost ability. And then with mana regen kicking in there, maybe that is an extra 2 abilities you would have been able to use than before. Not bad for only a 3-point card. The next one we have to look at here is power. So with varying levels of purchased intellect after getting Mana Flow Acolyte, you gain a certain buff to certain amounts of total power you already have equipped, and then you get a bonus from that amount. So if you were to have 5%, you know, if you were to have 10 points of purchased intellect after Mana Flow Acolyte, you would have 5% extra power, and if you were to have 21 power, that would simply give you 1.1 power more simply through having Mana Flow Acolyte. Yeah, 1.1 power doesn't go very far, but remember, increased attack speed, especially increased scaling from abilities and stuff like that. Like, we're into like the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scaling, so that 1.1 turns into 6, stuff like that. Remember, power goes a lot it's much more impactful here in version 42. Now, say you know, you start in the early game with only a few points, a little wee bit of power. You're not really getting very much, but here in the late game, when you have all of these purchase points into intellect, and say you have down here, you know, 40 to 63 power or something like that. Hey, that is another 4 to 6, almost 7 points of power that can, you know, again, multiplied by 6 through a lot of casters' ultimate abilities, multiplied through those base scalings. Hey, maybe that can go not that far. I mean, or sorry, maybe that can go quite far, since that really good power scaling is in effect. And remember, it's only a 3-point cost card. Now we have a bit of a tougher thing to do here. The math is pretty simple. That's just what it is. You can interpret it any way you want. Try to apply that to reality as much as you want. This comparisons here, it's hard to do. I'm just not gonna lie, it's hard to do. Right at this top here, we have low cost cards going all the way up to 13-point cost cards up here. And let me try to explain this. So what I've tried to do here is take cards and compare their power and mana regen to the minimum amount of intellect and base mana you would need to make Mana Flow Acolyte equal that card in stats. I'm not including any passive or actives. Please take that into account. I've tried to do so by putting plus signs, and I only did that once. So pretty much all of them is going to be much more than this if you want to include those passives and actives. So just please keep that into account. This is again the minimum intellect you would need and the minimum max mana you would need to make Mana Flow Acolyte equal these cards, and this is the minimum amount of intellect and power you would need to interact with each other to make Mana Flow Acolyte as just as powerful as these cards. So as you can see, Pack Leader, well, Mana Flow Acolyte simply better than that. Again, not including that passive. Brilliant Fortification, it needs some intellect, quite a bit of intellect, and at least some power here to be the same. What I've tried to do is use my as reasonable of an estimation here as to how much power and intellect you would have, just for my knowledge of casters and the way games go and stuff like that. So I've tried to make these as realistic as possible. And guys, as you can see, it's pretty darn interesting. What this means here, why there's no numbers here, is simply because it's pretty much impossible for Mana Flow Acolyte to equal these high-end cards in the power damage department. It's pretty much impossible. You need an absurd amount of power, or you go way above your intellect limit, which you just can't do. So it's pretty much impossible for Mana Flow Acolyte to equal something like Plague Lord Malik that gives 17 power, Grinning Spectre especially with the 25 power and that active. It's simply impossible. But the mana side of things, the mana and mana regen, that sustain part, looks like Mana Flow Acolyte can actually compare to the stats that some of these cards bring. Yeah, some of them are pretty absurd, like 22 points of intellect and 2100 base mana, but a lot of them not really. 1100 base mana, 22 intellect, 1300 base mana, 22 intellect, is really not that bad. And for the power side, it's actually not that bad for a lot of them as well. Again, not including passives or actives. So it looks like, just from looking at these comparisons and trying to make Mana Flow Acolyte equal some of these cards, it looks like Mana Flow Acolyte can actually become a 7 to 8 or a 10 to 13 point, well, and or a 10 to 13 point cost card somewhat. It can become a fair, a barely basic kind, a modest equivalent of these cards. And you know what? Remember, it's a 3 frickin' point card. So what can we say about Mana Flow Acolyte? That's some that are some somewhat conclusions, something like that, because it's quite interesting. Mana Flow Acolyte is a great 3 attribute points cost card for power. If you're a mage, a damage hero that just is looking for power, it's 3 points. It has 9 power. It's great compared to other 3-point cost cards. It's just great. It's a great early game pick. Yeah, you can rush Invader Mage and other cards like that, but Mana Flow Acolyte in its own is actually really quite good. Now, Mana Flow Acolyte can't really become a 6 to 8 attribute point cost card by the mid game. It simply can't. If you took a look, if you go back in the video and kind of look at those two charts and the comparisons, you can see that either you need way too much attribute points into intellect to feed into Mana Flow Acolyte, and you need too much base power that you simply don't have in the mid game to make Mana Flow Acolyte like a 7 to 8, 6 to 8 cost card. You can't. It's only in that late mid game, or I suppose if you farm really exceptionally well, or in the early late game, does Mana Flow Acolyte really kind of kick into action with, especially the hero levels. I think Mana Flow Acolyte really actually synergizes more with hero levels, to be honest with you, than anything else. Only then does it really kind of come online and start to equate like a 6 to 8 cost card, and finally kind of get out of the minor leagues to say that. Now, for power though, Mana Flow Acolyte can become a lesser stat, 10 to 13 attribute point cost card by the end game, but can't compete with heavy duty cards. So like really crazy cards like Amplification Engineer, you can see up here, it's just monstrous. Plus that the passive from Amplification Engineer is just amazing. It gives 24 power. Like that is a huge card. It can, Mana Flow Acolyte, there's no way it can simply simply compete. There's just no way. But some of these other high-end cards, it can. Nameless Curse, it kind of can. Again, it has a fantastic active, so we're not including that. OPD Militia, again, it has a fantastic active, so like at least you can, if you want just the stats and not these passive and actives, Mana Flow Acolyte can kind of be it. It can kind of become a lesser stat, 10 to 13 of attribute point cost card by the end game, and then early end game, like I said, or late mid game, it can kind of be a 6 to 8 point cost card. Hey, it works. And remember, this isn't assuming you are combining it with something like Thaumaturge, like something like Deadly Mana, something like the Experience Gem, which I just said Mana Flow Acolyte synergizes very well with increased hero level. And this is assuming you're not doing any of those. So if you do that, you might have more success with this, and some of these statements need to be changed for those scenarios. So with all this said, what are some conclusions I'm going to go out on a limb on and make with Mana Flow Acolyte? Well, it's a good source of very early game power. 3 points into intellect, and boom, there's 9 power. Great. Hey, you want to dominate your lane a little bit more? You want to be a good poke gadget, good poke Gideon? Great. Fan-freaking-tastic. It's a good card. 9 power, man. That goes pretty long ways. Now, while it falls off in power in the mid game, because it just needs too much points into intellect, too much mana, and too much power to become effective, to turn into a greater card, it does provide decent mana. The mana is actually there. If we go back here, you can see that in some cases here with the 7 and 8 point cost cards, you only need 11 points into intellect and 700 base mana. Not bad. It can provide you with some resource value in the mid game, just not necessarily in the damage part. Remember though, it's still only 3 cost card. By the late game, Mana Flow Acolyte becomes a weaker card stat-wise compared to other endgame cards, especially because we're not including passives and actives. I don't think it would be fair for me to try to include those passives and actives mathematically. There would be way too many unrealistic / too compromised assumptions to try to complete that, and I hope you guys appreciate that. We just can't. Paragon, Epics has done a great job of making it much less spreadsheetable, Paragon. So I hope you guys appreciate that. Now, its saving grace, and why I think I would recommend Mana Flow Acolyte, to be honest with you, is its saving grace is how it saves attribute points for higher cost cards. I've been saying this whole time, it's only 3 freaking attribute points, man. It's only 3 points. Now, if you are willing to forego a few stats, forego a few actives or passives, and keep a card that scales all right into the late game, kind of, and you want a little bit of an edge and you play smart and you can get an edge and get ahead, what you can do is you can go for some crazy cards. You can go for 2 13-point cost cards right off the bat. Just go for them. Keep Mana Flow Acolyte. You might cut Thaumaturge in there. You might go straight for something like like Amplification Engineer. Go straight for Godmother Vigilant, which is a bit different, which the passive doesn't work, but you get the point. Go straight for that 13-point cost card. Yeah, maybe get another card in there as a transition. Get that. Or keep that and go for Red Zone. Mana Flow Acolyte and Thaumaturge, and just go straight for Red Zone. Something like that. If you want to play that certain kind of style, I think Mana Flow Acolyte is the card for you. Remember, it's only 3-point cost cards. If you can use those attribute points that you're saving through Mana Flow Acolyte effectively and use that to snowball a little bit or create an advantage, I think Mana Flow Acolyte works really well. So, with all of that said, how would you use Mana Flow Acolyte? What do you do? What scenario do you see Mana Flow Acolyte really excelling? Because I'm a bit lost. Like, my gut says, get the Deadly Mana Gem, get Mana Flow Acolyte, get Thaumaturge, and just keep that. Just keep that. Go to town with those 3, and yes, get that 3rd card of kind of whatever you need. You're going for a very stat-heavy deck at that point, so maybe you're a hero that is just really solid in their kit, and you don't really necessarily need too much. Zinx, for example, I know you don't really play Zinx like that. She's a very phenomenal hero like that. Shinbi. Maybe you want to try that with Shinbi because she has great escape and stuff like that. I don't know. Let me know down in the comments what sort of scenario you think works really well with Mana Flow Acolyte. Please like this video if you like it, dislike it, and please subscribe. If you guys like this content, found it useful, hit that subscribe button so I can do it for you in the future. If you'd like to support me, what I do on a regular basis, head on over to my Patreon account where you can support me on a regular basis and help me do what I love. Look in the video description for links to my website and Amazon affiliate links where you guys can simply do your Amazon shopping. Doesn't cost you anything and helps me out a lot. Till next time, like always, guys, stay optimistic and positive.